Hey there, it's Dusty once again with another story for you. This is Am I the Astronaut for postponing my mother's son trip to support my wife. I promised my mother, 64 female, that I, 29 male, would go with her to Tanzania. She's always wanted to go and talked about it for years, but since she divorced my dad over a decade ago, hasn't had anyone to go with. My wife, 27 female, pointed out that once we have children, the chances of my going on a 3-week vacation alone will be pretty low, and by the time our children grow up, my mother might be too old to travel long distances. So I told my mom I wanted to go with her. She cried, she was so happy. The trip was booked for March. My wife has been nothing but supportive. Unfortunately, my wife and I have struggled to conceive. We have been trying for 2 years and moved to a different country recently away from my mother. I assured my mother the trip was still going ahead. My wife and I recently had our first round of IVF and it failed. The doctors had been confident because my wife is still young, but it didn't. My wife and I took this news hard, especially my wife. I won't go into the details, but despite only being 27, my wife has some significant fertility issues. We found out that we're probably never going to have a child, even with IVF. My wife's mental health, even after the IVF failure, declined, and what made matters worse is the day we found out it failed, I had to go on a 2-week business trip. My wife was left on her own in a new foreign country with no family or friends, starting a new job, grappling with this awful news on her own. That is awful. Awful. My wife lost weight and is now under supervision by a psychiatrist and psychologist and medicated daily. When I came home, I saw my wife was skeletally thin and struggling to get out of bed every day. Leaving her on her own is not an option for the foreseeable. I called my mother and explained the situation. I told her I wanted to delay our trip by 10 weeks so that my wife could finish her treatment and come with us. It was a win-win. My mother gets her trip, I'm still a good son, but most importantly, I don't abandon my wife. Of course, I offered to pay for all additional costs, including new flights, so my mother wasn't out of pocket. My mother was initially supportive. She said she understood and thought the compromise was sensible. She even offered to come see us in our new country in March to give us support. A week later, my mother called me and said she's disappointed about the trip being postponed and that we had let her down. She said, with my wife coming, that the trip would be different than what she expected. She said she can't handle the thought of it potentially being postponed again, we never said it would be, and no longer wanted to go on the trip at all. She said she never wanted to speak about the trip either. She canceled the flights and asked my wife and I to refund her for everything, which we did. Once we paid her back, she stopped answering my texts. She hasn't once reached out to my wife, who she's known for 10 plus years and knew how much our children mean to her, about the IVF, the trip, nothing. Or me. Am I the astronaut?
Who did the mom talk to?
Important comment by OP. The order of the events was I suggested the 10-week delay, and including my wife, Mom agreed. We had a call a few days later. Mom said, let's push it for 1 year without daughter-in-law. I agreed. 1 week passes. Mom says she would rather just cancel the trip and shut down. Sorry, drafting this within the character count was a challenge. Okay, yeah, she talked to somebody. She found somebody else to go with. OP. That's where I'm at. She found somebody else to go with. She's not answering. She's just ghosting you now. And yes, she might actually be butthurt by this, which says a ton about her character here. She does not care about you or your wife. That's what you can get from this. Your wife taking this hard and going through this, you are right there with her. And the fact that as soon as you got this news, you were gone for 2 weeks and she was left on her own, completely isolated. And your mom doesn't address that at all. She's just like, oh, I guess it makes sense to wait a little bit. And then comes back and reneges on that. Like, no, okay. Mama's only worried about mama here. And I think she found somebody else to go with. That's why she wanted to cancel it. Because she wasn't going with you anymore. She was going with somebody else. Or maybe solo. I don't know. But I think she found somebody else to go with. NTA for OP and his wife, AskCon 1 for mother-in-law. I mean, we don't know for sure what she's doing, but her reaction here was not okay. Grid of Cobra, I was about to say there weren't any astronauts here, just an unfortunate situation. And then the mom opened her dang mouth. Okay, mama, there are a couple of signals here that make it just shady AF. One is the change of tone, right? She was understanding about it and then all of a sudden wasn't. 2 is her lack of empathy for anything involving your wife's situation and your situation here with the failed IVF and hearing the news that you'll never be able to have kids. Like, that's a huge life and world changing thing to find out. And she is only worried about her trip. Accepted the compromise, but there's no compromise. What a decent human being would have done right then would have been like, okay, like, the trip isn't a thing. Like, let's just focus up on you. I'll be there tomorrow. Like, we're going to get you guys back to healthy status. That's what she would have done if she gave any shits. Instead, she acted completely self-centered and then just ended up ghosting you. Yeah, she's going on the trip. Either she found one of her bridge gals to go with her, or yeah, she's taking Cabana Boy or something. I don't know, but she's going without you. Or is she trying to oust the wife because no grandkids? Maybe the whole no grandkid thing just made her so sour that she's just done, but cutting off her own child, cutting off contact with her own child there too. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So the question was, am I the astronaut for postponing my mother-son trip to support my wife? No, of course not. You are not the astronaut for that. If we knew what was really going on with your mom, we could probably assign her an ASCON rating here. I think at minimum, she's at 2. She definitely should not have done what she did. Very, very likely that it's a 1. We would just need a little bit more information to confirm that.